big Lakai guy now, or what are we talking?
You're
Bringing it back, dude.
Switch it up.
Is Lakai on a comeback?
I have no idea.
Maybe. I mean, I feel like I didn't see him for a while, and then you started repping him all of a sudden.
I guess I'm bringing him back.
I might have to get a set of those, you know? Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing another update video on the Ranger build. As always, we have Christian here to walk us through the truck. Before we hop into this episode though, we just wanted to go over a few brief things. One, Christian and I are going to continue to use the mics because of all the positive feedback in the last video. And also, Christian posted on his story on Vital Designs the other day, just asking what kind of products everyone would like. We got a lot of feedback of things that you guys are interested in, a lot of which that we already have to offer. So do you want to talk about first just a few things that we have to offer through Vital Designs so far?
We have short course trailing arms, standard trailing arms, as well as sway bar arms currently right now. And then we have a lot of stuff like this beam kit that we're putting on this truck will be something that will be available at some point. We're still working through a couple things to make that an option for people just to be able to buy, but we do have a lot more stuff on top of that as well. But right now, just those three things, mostly trailing arms, and then we do have the sway bar arms as well.
So if you guys are interested in any of those products, hit up either Christian or I on social media and we can get you set up with that. We're also working on a website, but we'll get into that in a future video. But let's just hop in the truck and go over some of the updates for this video.
Yeah, since the last video, the only thing that has gotten done on the front is getting the bump stops in place. So the majority of the time that I have spent on this truck since the last video has been inside, and we'll get to that. But on the front of this thing, getting these bump stops in place was kind of an ordeal because of the track width on this truck is being pretty narrow compared to what most of these Rangers are. So getting the shocks packaged where they need to go was a tricky situation, and then going and getting the bump stops mounted now in between all of that stuff and making sure nothing hits itself was definitely, I had to play with the location of the bump stop quite a bit to get all that stuff to work properly. But we can cycle this just so you guys can kind of see what this is all doing. Because once you have a fixed bump stop location, because the can is welded directly to the frame rail, that thing does not move. And then you have a coilover and bypass that swings as it cycles through the suspension. You have things get close and then get far away as it cycles through the suspension travel. So we can go from full compression all the way to full droop and kind of show you guys what the bump stop is doing. And then you can kind of see this thing cycle as well, because we haven't really shown that in a video.
Yep, so you want to just bring it up to bump and then we can kind of check out what's happening here?
So as it comes up to full compression, you can see the bump stop gets pretty close to the coilover. Let me grab this. So there's full compression right there. The way that I mounted these bump stops too is same way as I did the rear, I took the Delrin pad out of the bump stop. So I knew that the can, or the entire bump stop itself, was landing perfectly 90 degrees to the surface on the beam where the pad is at. So you'll see as this thing cycles out, it goes from being close to the coilover and the spring, and then as it cycles down through the travel, you'll watch it start to get closer to the bottom of the bypass. So that's not full droop right there. The only thing stopping it right now is the rotor hitting the ground. So it still does have a little bit more to go, but that is at least like a good idea of seeing what is going on there. And the bump stop that's on the front of this truck is a 2-inch diameter by 2-inch stroke. And what I'll probably end up doing is shortening up that stroke just a little bit to either 1.25 inches or 1 inch, just so it's working properly with the bypass and the bump zone inside of here. There's still some calculation I need to do and figure out like where that stuff is coming in, because I don't want this bump zone coming in at the same time as the bump stop does. I want the bump zone to be able to do what it needs to do and let the shock work, and then have that bump stop come in like midway through the bump zone in the bypass, so it's more progressive instead of hitting two different zones at the same exact time, because you can start introducing a very harsh feeling into the truck. So
definitely, and let's just chew on that a little bit more. For people who aren't familiar with how these bypass shocks work exactly, do you want to discuss what the bump zone is and how the bypasses work, and how that comes in?
Yeah, so right now the truck is fully extended, or very close to it. So the piston that is connected to this shaft right here is inside the body down in here. So you have your tubes out here on the outsides of the body, and what these are doing is allowing fluid to come outside of the main body where that piston is and all your valving. It comes into the tube above the piston as it starts to come up through the stroke of the shock. It'll come out into the tube and bypass the fluid around the piston. So what that's doing is allowing the shock to be a little bit softer, and you're not using the dampening or the valving that you have inside of the shock. It's allowing that fluid to bypass around it. So as you're down here and it starts to come up through each zone, it progressively gets more and more stiff because you're losing that fluid being bypassed around the piston. So as you're down here, you have all 3 tubes that it's using to allow fluid as it's being pushed up on top of the piston to go through that tube. You start losing each one of those, making it more firm, and you're starting to introduce that valving more and more as you start to go up through the compression stroke. And then once you get to the top of this very last tube, that's when it goes to all your valving that you have on top of the piston for your compression side. So if you stack a bunch of valving in the shock, you can allow the fluid to bypass around this, and then once you get up here to like the very last bit of travel before the truck fully bottoms out, you'll go to all the valving that you have in the shock, which is typically pretty stiff. So it slows the truck down even more, and then that's also what the bump stop is for too.
Right, so the valving that's on the piston is the highest damping, which if you think about fluid, takes the path of least resistance, which is why these bypass zones work. It's literally letting fluid bypass around that main piston. So you hit that last zone, and what you're saying is you don't want the bump stop to come in at the same time, because then you just have the high damping of the bypass and then the bump stop engaging at the same point. And which if you tune it and you set it up to where the the bump stop comes in later, you can almost have like more variable tuning with the bump
It's
zone.
another zone. You're adding another zone. So your bump zone is a zone, obviously. Each one of these tubes is a zone that the piston is passing through, and it's getting progressively more firm as it cycles up through the compression stroke. And then that bump zone is a zone, and then your bump stop is a zone as well. So if you have your bump stop zone and your bump zone come in at the same time, it causes a very harsh feeling in the truck, or it can, where you'll end up taking pressure out of your bump stop to compensate for that so it's not as harsh, which is not a good thing to do. So you want to let your bypass shocks and your coilover to an extent, but mostly your bypass, you want to let this thing work as much as it possibly can and be as efficient as possible, which means you're allowing this thing to use every single zone of the shock the way that it needs to dampen the truck properly.
Definitely.
So,
and we were even talking about some of the new technology that's coming out that lets you add like damping to the bump stops now as well, and they're adding tubes to that. So
you can add tubes and reservoirs and make it a fully fluid controlled
so like
thing,
kind of the key idea behind all this stuff is just having as much tuning capability as possible, and that's what these trucks are built around in order to make them perform how they should.
Yes.
Do you know how much up travel there is from ride height?
It's like 10 to 11 inches of up travel from like my desired ride height, which is where it's at on jack stands right now.
Okay. Which like that for a beam truck is very good.
That's ideal,
That's a great number.
So if you're talking like equal length, or not equal length, but like a center mounted front end, like A-arm style stuff where it's fully custom, basically what a trophy truck has on it, you're talking higher numbers. But with a factory frame rail still and I-beams, that 10 to 12 inches of travel range from ride height is a pretty good goal to shoot for. And then the rear, which we've talked about, you're usually in that like 12 to 14, 16 if you can, inches of up travel range from ride height is like the good sweet spot.
Sweet. And that's actually really funny. Like just thinking back to the CAD design, and when Christian and I designed this beam kit, him and I got a bunch of measurements of the frame rails, and then I designed everything in SolidWorks.
Yeah, there was no scanning this. That was all hand measurements.
Right. And in the computer, it showed me 11.5 inches of up travel. So like it seems like you're hitting right there, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So up front, are there any more big updates that you would like to go through?
No, but we can like look at the pad because that's kind of not conventional too. So like going back to what I was talking about, can you see that?
Yep.
Light-wise?
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah, so going back to like what I was talking about, like just packaging, especially up in this area for the bump stop itself up in here was very tight. But to get this bump stop to land where it needed to and not interfere with anything, the pad had to be in a weird spot as well. So instead of having this bump stop bump off the very top of the beam, which is the most ideal situation, it had to be pulled back off the back side of the beam. So this pad that I made is all 3/16 to match pretty much the whole structure of what the beam is. And then it also, you can see the heat mark in here. There's a center structure in there as well, like a support that goes right down through the center of this pad, exactly where the center of this bump stop hits at full compression. So that way, when this thing hits and you take a hard impact at full compression, when everything is fully collapsed, you're not putting a dent into this pad.
Yep. So you just need the structure underneath to be able to support that, which when we initially designed this kit and how we did our truck as well, there is within this top plate, there is a rib in here as well.
Yes.
Which is where the bump stop's intended to be. But again, with just packaging constraints on this truck, we weren't able to follow that.
Yeah.
Which would be more ideal because obviously you do add a little bit of a moment here. I'm wanting to kind of roll the beam over.
A little bit, yes.
So, but like with everything on here, it's not a concern. Like,
and
it's very,
like what Jake was just touching on with all the internal ribbing, that all comes into forethought of like thinking all this stuff out before we actually start building any of it. So all the internal ribbing is there for support with the bump stop coming in here, as well as on the radius arm, you can see where all the internal gusseting is for where the coilover actually mounts on here as well.
Yep.
So there's structure inside of the radius arm and the beam where all the big loads are going to be put through these parts.
Yep. So that's why this one is vertical. It's intended to have the loads of the coilover set on there. So, yep, like Christian said, you just have to think about all this stuff in advance.
And that just comes from experience of us
definitely
looking at stuff, also like bending stuff like that obviously made an impact on how we build things now. But yeah, like all of our knowledge gets thrown into this stuff and we try and make it the best we possibly can every single time. So that's going to get passed down to everybody that buys our products in the future. All that R&D and time spent like screwing stuff up, fixing it, making it better, and just putting everything we can into our parts is what makes the end product just that much better.
Yep, like learn from your mistakes, iterate, and just make products better, which is the way we've been progressing.
R&D, baby.
Yep, cool. So do you want to jump inside and check out some of the structure?
Yeah, because that's all the stuff inside now is everything that I've been working on the majority of the time, which it's been, how long did you say? Like
it's been, I think,
3 or 4 weeks?
3 or 4 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, so like all the stuff inside of here was very time consuming. So it doesn't, I don't know, it's hard to tell because it does kind of look like a lot of stuff, but it doesn't, but we're just kind of get into it.
We're going to judge you on this.
Yeah.
You better see a lot of 3 holes, a lot of work done.
Oh, man. So I think this is actually probably a good spot to be able to show this stuff because people are asking about seeing all the structure that's going to be in here before all the panel work starts going in for the flooring and just sealing this thing back off. So as far as tube work goes, there's not anything more that's going in this thing to be able to start paneling it in. So this is everything that's going to be in the truck to start building everything back out. The first thing, it all kind of ties together too. So we'll kind of go through this the best that I can. The first thing that I started on was the center console structure. And I just wanted to make something that was on the smaller side as far as height profile because I was just keeping in mind like where the floor is going to be at. I don't want there to be like some big massive center section in the center of the truck. There will be a console that gets built on top of this stuff, but as far as where the floor is at and everything gets sealed off to, I didn't want that structure to be really big. So it did come in from the points up here in the corners where all the miters are, just to keep everything tied in the correct spots. It tapers down. I kept the width of everything proportionate to where the shifter's at. So my plan is once this thing is paneled in, I'll be able to take the factory little boot guy, and then this will sit right back in, kind of how it was factory in all the sealed tin work. And then where things kind of started getting more difficult and really time consuming is the center console and the seat mounts and these door bars all work together. So I couldn't build one thing without the other. So if you look at how the seat mounts are made, one, I guess we could talk about this because we did talk about this in the previous video and you just saw this all cut out.
Yep.
So the pivot box did end up getting cut to bring the seat down lower. The seat literally sits, you can see kind of where the bolt holes are. The bottom of the seat sits right in this pocket right here. So I did end up running a tube to support the seat mounts right through the center of the pivot box, and that left me a good spot to be able to tie all this back in. And it actually ended up working out really well because of the gusset that I added down here previously. And I got lucky with that because that wasn't something that I was like thinking about ahead of time. I just wanted to add a little bit more structure to this pivot box where it kind of had the press brake in it to kind of kick everything over for the upper pivot. But that ended up working really well with this tube and kind of adding a nice gusset to that whole area and tying all of this together. But these tubes are 1.25 inches 120 that the seat mounts actually sit on. And then the door bar is 1.75 inches 120 as well. That comes down, and then the front side of the seat mounts tie into that. So these 1.25 inch tubes don't go down to this main structure that is there for the actual cab cage. So I started with these two main tubes just running just long on the truck, and then started fitting everything to the door bars, getting the door bars in place, as well as adding, there's a tube down here as well. I don't know if you can get that, but a support tube that comes down here as well that's tying in just that load that's coming in from the seat mounts, everything trying to push down on this 1 3/4 tube. It's being transferred down into the frame as well. So
is that just 1 3/4, like 95 or something?
Oh, 9.5, yeah.
Okay.
So that's tying in the door bar structure right here down into the truck, as well as tying in this whole junction down here where this tube comes up to the front corner of the A-pillar as well. And then it's tying in the pivot box more on the frame rail too. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot going on in that kind of area right there.
And everything in here is on nodes too.
It is,
like
yes.
Everything ties in.
There's a junction for everything.
Yeah. You don't have tubes just landing in random spots. Like it's all planned out to where you're getting load transfer efficiently.
On everything, yeah. So that's the three things. So center console structure, you can see, I don't know with that lens, I don't know if you can see to the center, like where the console comes in for the seat mount. So this right here. Mm-hmm. So the seat mount, originally I just had it shoot directly across the whole length of the truck just to get the seat mounts in and make sure the seats were straight and everything was nice and parallel side to side. Mm-hmm. Same thing with this back tube. And then I ended up cutting everything off in the center where the console was gonna, or the center console was gonna go. And that's where these tubes came in. So it's 1 3/4 coming off of down at the bottom side of the chassis.
1 1/4, you mean?
Sorry, what did I say?
1 3/4.
Yeah, so 1 1/4, sorry, that comes down from the bottom of the chassis. Same thing, tying into where this tube comes in and crashes. It comes up, and then I stepped it down to have it land on the 1-inch tube. Mm-hmm. So everything kind of ties together. And getting all that stuff to like work together instead of just, okay, seat mounts are in, okay, door bar goes in, okay, center console goes there. It was like, all right, how can I make all of this stuff work together to where it looks like it was thought out and not just like things just placed all over the chassis.
Definitely. And I like what you said about everything kind of being low profile as well. Mm-hmm. This being the single cab truck, like especially with the cage and everything, like it can start to feel really small.
Very claustrophobic, yeah.
And I think you've done a really good job with this truck, getting the seats back, having the B-pillar, C-pillar outside.
Yeah.
And then just creating enough room in here for it to feel comfortable still. And
more
not
open.
Claustrophobic, yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I know this being a regular cab truck, space is going to be tight regardless, no matter what. But you can really shoot yourself in the foot if you're not keeping that in the front of your mind the entire time. So the minimal amount of space that you can like close in on yourself, the better. And I know like once the dash structure starts to go in this thing, pedals start to go in, steering wheel is in front of you, like you're gonna start to feel a lot smaller in the truck.
Definitely.
But as of right now, I'm trying to just keep everything as blown open as possible to keep that to a minimum when the truck is fully ready to go.
Moving forward a little bit from the seat mounts, I also see that you got the exhaust in the truck. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about how you went through the design for this and what you wanted to do with the exhaust and your goals for it?
Yeah, so I think we touched on this previously as well. With this engine being the factory engine still, I didn't want to spend a bunch of time knowing that we're putting a V8 in it later on the exhaust and the materials that are being used and all that stuff. Another thing that I wanted to do, because it is still running the factory manifolds, I wanted to keep the exhaust size as close as I could to what it was factory as well, to keep the same amount of back pressure in the exhaust system, so that way it's making the same amount of power and torque that it was previously. Because what will end up happening, and I know this from experience because I did it on my last truck, if you just put a big diameter tube on this thing from the manifold back, yeah, it sounds super cool, but you lose all your horsepower and torque numbers because you're not making the correct amount of back pressure for what the engine is making power-wise. So with this one, the factory like H pipe, I guess you would call it, or Y pipe that it had, that came into one. It was 2-inch diameter tubing coming from the manifolds and then came into one that ended up being about 2.5 or 3 inches in diameter and ran to the back of the truck.
Probably 2.5. 3.
Yeah.
3 is a little big, yeah.
It's a little big, but so what I did is this crosses over in the very back, but it is basically like almost like a true dual system all the way up until that point in the very back of the truck. So I kept the 2-inch diameter from the manifolds, comes down. That is where you can see on both sides, that's where the O2 sensors are. So I tried to keep the O2 sensors in the exact same spot as where they were previously, as far as the orientation and just length from the manifold. So I tried to keep everything identical to what it was previously. And then it steps up. I have the adapter that goes from 2-inch to 2.5. And then right shortly after that, there's a V-band. And then it kind of snakes its way up to the back of the truck, there's another V-band. So where I place the V-bands at, it just makes it to where if you need to service anything on this truck, they're in the right spots to be able to get the right sections of tubing for the exhaust out of the way. To be able to, if you need to like work on pivots, which you can still get wrenches and stuff on there, but if you're going to be doing like extensive work on the back of this truck, you want to be able to pull this exhaust system apart as well as be able to get the thing out of the truck. So if this V-band wasn't placed here, this section of tubing all the way up to where this V-band is, from the manifold all the way to that second V-band, you'd have such a long section of tubing to try and get out of the truck if you needed to work on anything, that it's not ideal. So having V-bands in the correct spots and just kind of laying all this stuff out to where it fits in the chassis nicely. It's going to be underneath the flooring, so I had to keep that in mind as far as height. The exhaust does get pretty close to the bottom side of where the seats are mounted, but obviously there is going to be flooring here as well to like separate the two, but all this stuff as well is going to be wrapped in heat wrap. So the entire section from the manifold all the way up to the X-pipe and probably past that as well where the mufflers are at, all the tubing will be wrapped with heat wrap, so it's keeping the heat down in this whole system, because it does get pretty close, and this is a tight quarters kind of vehicle. So keeping everything sucked inside of the frame rails, you kind of just have to deal with that packaging, instead of having everything outside of the frame rails, which there wasn't an option running the factory manifolds. There was no way for me to get everything to come outside of the frame. So that's just kind of the way that this ended up working out. But the materials used on all this stuff is all just standard steel. So I personally didn't want to run anything stainless on this exhaust system because of the engine package that it's running. When we go to a V8 later, it will be stainless everything, which is what I've done up until this point, has always been stainless exhaust because obviously it doesn't rust, and it's just a lot nicer quality material. When you're using this just standard steel stuff, none of this, the only thing on this entire exhaust system that is made here in the US is the adapters, and those welded the best out of all this stuff. The quality of this stuff is definitely not like the most ideal, I would say, but it's doing exactly what it needs to be doing.
Right, and that just aligns with your goals is, one, keep it like factory performance, like don't take any cuts there, and then also have it be cheap and inexpensive because you know it's going to get tossed eventually.
Yeah.
So just a quick thing to whip up and get on the truck, and yeah, looks really good. Do you want to look at the X-pipe in the back a little bit further?
Yeah, so another thing with that too is like if we did go stainless, the price difference between going from what we used here to going to stainless is at least double the amount of money. Even using the same diameter tubes and everything, the price difference to jump up to stainless stuff, you're literally doubling the price, and this was already on the more expensive side. I did do 2 orders with this because I didn't know exactly how I was going to run stuff, so we just kind of pre-ran it the first time. I ordered what I thought I needed, and then we ordered a second batch of all the stuff we needed, and after we got into everything, I want to say just materials alone to get everything for the exhaust done minus tips, like how it's going to exit the truck, I want to say we're right at like that $650, $700 range. So even just going this cheaper route, it's still somewhat expensive, especially after you factor in like labor on top of that.
Yep.
Whereas stainless, like you're a considerable amount of money, which doesn't make sense for this engine package.
Yeah, which once this gets upgraded, it'll get a nicer exhaust
yeah,
system. Yeah,
it'll get like what our truck has with all stainless everything, nice quality V-band clamps, all that kind of stuff, which it has all V-band clamps on it. This is 100% going to work totally fine. It's just the quality level as far as like the materials being used are not up to like my typical standard, but knowing what this is running, it does not make sense to put a crazy nice quality, like material quality exhaust on this truck for right now, but it will get that in the future.
Cool. Yeah, so jumping back here, you can start to see, well, one, where it merges in the X-pipe, and then
Yes.
where it's going to shoot out.
Can you see that? Do you need light?
Yeah, we can see it. Let's grab the light as well.
So yeah, the X-pipe on the back of this thing is something that I made. It's not something that is bought. It was just 2 120-degree bends because it was kind of in a tricky spot. It needed to do the X in a very specific way. So I just used 2 120-degree bends, and then is that you?
Yeah, I'm over here and stuff, dude.
It's just 2 120-degree bends, and then you can see where the V-bands are at the bottom. I will do another set of V-bands up here at the top, and this will end up getting kicked outwards. So I'll end up cutting this again. This will get rotated out, and then this will end up coming, and it's going to be shooting out of the side of the truck in between this little triangle here in the side of the bed, or the back half. So right here, the tip will come out through the panel work. I'm not sure if we're gonna do mesh like on the panel and just have the tip right behind it, or if we're actually gonna have the tip come out of the panel work. But that is the spot where it's gonna come out of. And that's another thing too, is like thinking about where all your electronics are gonna be ran at, or your wiring is gonna be ran at, as well as where all your plumbing for your fuel system is gonna be ran at. And you need, like, to me, that stuff needs to be complete, like as far away from each other as possible, because obviously fuel and hot temperature things do not work well together. Same thing with wiring. You don't want to be melting wiring. So just kind of thinking about where all that stuff is going to be ran ahead of time. That is the best spot to have the tips come out at. Instead, like I could have done something up out of the top of the truck, but that's a really common thing. And this truck being outside, I don't want to have him think about like water getting into his exhaust if it's pointed up. So just having it come out the sides of the truck is the best option. I didn't want it to dump to the ground because that typically causes a big poof of dust every time you start the truck, which is like what our truck does. It's just a big old freaking dust collector.
It's a crop duster.
Yeah, so like that's not the most ideal thing. So I think running the exhaust tips out the sides will be the best option on here. And then just getting that X pipe in place. It's mounted. There's 2 tabs that come off this cage work for the B pillar on the back side of the X pipe. And right now it just has some washers in there, but that'll end up getting some nice rubber grommets that go in between the 2 tabs. So that way there's as little like vibration going into the chassis as possible, because there is no like normal hanger setup where it has a big old rubber piece that is trying to isolate everything. With how tight the tolerances are with this exhaust to everything on the chassis, this exhaust really can't move all that much. So it's just, that's the one thing that, like, you're going to have vibration from the exhaust and the engine because of the way that the engine is mounted and the way that the exhaust is mounted, but it almost adds to that feeling of driving the truck. You feel one with the truck because you feel everything in it. So it's more of like a driver's thing, and not, you want it as comfortable as possible, but you also want to know what the vehicle is doing. And I've noticed with our truck, when you can feel, the first time that we started our truck, like when I was sitting in it, I was like, you can feel everything. And it's just it's a different kind of feeling, but it's definitely a, like once you get used to that, you can tell what the truck is doing. And it's like, that's the best like feeling you can have in one of these trucks, is you can feel from your seat, you can feel everything that's going on in this thing.
So it's cool to see the progress on that. And then do you want to talk about some of the parts that you have piled up over here for the rest of the exhaust?
Yeah, so the last things are mufflers that are going on this. So you can see everything with straight pipe in the truck so far. And then we will have some Gibson mufflers going on this thing as well. I try and use everything that I can that's US made. As far as the exhaust goes, there wasn't much I could get, at least from like Summit or Jegs, that was US made material for this just standard steel stuff. But these mufflers are stainless, and they are made in the USA. So these will end up going, I don't know, I'll go on that side and you can kind of see where they'll end up at. But each one, kind of like how I was talking, I was gonna direct the tube out. So these will end up going just like that off each side. And then the tip will come either right to the edge of that panel work, or it'll come out the side of the panel work, and you'll be able to have everything tucked up in there. But there will be another V-band here, and then these will sit on each side like this, and then there will be another tab that mounts the muffler here, so there's some nice support for it.
Definitely. Yeah, this is going to be really interesting to see what this truck sounds like.
I'm curious
to hear. Obviously, the goal wasn't to make it really raspy and annoying.
No.
But I'm curious to see like what the tone and how loud it is.
Yeah, because it should, with the X pipe and it being all pretty much straight piped until you get to the very end with the muffler, it should have a very nice sound at high RPM. I'm curious to hear what it sounds like at idle, and then like from a stop, just going normally like on the street.
That seems like a good place to wrap this video up though. If you have any questions, please leave those down in the comments and Christian and I will get back to you. But please like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.
Peace.